Whitfield clicked to his next PowerPoint slide, and there it was. My engine design displayed for the entire Ford engineering team to see, except now it had his name all over it. The kid was standing there in his $1,000 suit, pointing at my 6 months of work like he'd invented it himself. As you can see, Barry announced with that MBA confidence, this revolutionary approach to combustion chamber optimization represents a complete departure from traditional methodologies. My name is Howard Bradley. I'm 47 years old, and until that moment, I'd spent 24 years building pistons, designing engines, and solving problems that these young hotshots couldn't even pronounce. I'm not the guy who speaks up in meetings or plays office politics. I just do the work, do it right, and let the results speak for themselves. But sitting there watching this 28-year-old punk present my life's work as his own breakthrough, that changed everything. Let me back up and tell you how we got here. It started 8 months ago when Redwood Auto Parts landed the biggest contract in company history. Ford wanted a new fuel-efficient V6 engine design for their 2027 truck line. $50 million over 3 years, the kind of contract that sets you up for life, especially when you're thinking about retirement in a few years like I was. My wife Susan and I had been running the numbers. Our oldest daughter Emily was starting her junior year at State, and our son Jake would be starting college in 2 years. We're talking about $80,000 in tuition bills coming up, plus I wanted to make sure we had enough saved for a decent retirement. At 47, with 24 years at Redwood, I was finally in position to secure our family's future. This Ford contract could be the difference between a comfortable retirement and working until I dropped dead. Glenn Hoffman, our plant manager, called me into his office that Tuesday morning. "Howard," he said, "Ford specifically requested you for this project. They remember your work on the 2019 Explorer engine modifications, saved them about $200 million in recalls. That Explorer project had been one of my proudest achievements. Ford's original design had a fuel pump issue that would have meant massive recalls. I spent 3 months redesigning the fuel delivery system, working 14-hour days, missing Jake's baseball games and Emily's school play. But we caught the problem before a single truck rolled off the production line. I'd been working on fuel efficiency innovations in my spare time for years. Nights, weekends, even some vacation days. Susan used to joke that I loved those engines more than I loved her. Not true, but I did have a passion for making things work better, cleaner, more efficient. The climate change stuff, the gas prices, it all mattered to real people trying to get to work every day. Glenn assigned Barry Whitfield to handle the project management side. Fresh MBA from Northwestern, smart kid, definitely knew his way around spreadsheets and client presentations. His father played golf with one of Redwood's board members, which probably didn't hurt his career prospects. At first I thought it would work out fine. He'd handle the business side, I'd handle the engineering, clean division of labor. Barry started coming by my workshop every few days, asking questions about my progress. Real detailed questions about the combustion chamber angles, the fuel injection timing, the computer modeling I was using. He'd bring his tablet, taking notes, sometimes asking me to explain the same concept 3 different ways. I figured he was just trying to understand the technical side so he could explain it to the Ford team. I've always believed in sharing knowledge. That's how the industry moves forward. Besides, we were supposed to be on the same team. "Howard, this fuel injection pattern you're testing," he'd say, "can you walk me through the mathematics behind it? I want to make sure I can explain it properly to management." I'd spend an hour drawing diagrams, showing him the computer simulations, explaining how tiny changes in injection timing could create massive efficiency gains. Barry was a good listener, asked intelligent questions. Sometimes he'd even suggest business applications I hadn't considered. "Have you thought about how this could scale to Redwood's other contracts? This technology could be worth millions in licensing deals." For 6 months, I worked 12-hour days perfecting that engine design. I'd run computer simulations until 2 a.m., build prototypes in my garage workshop, test them until they broke, then build them better. Susan would bring me coffee and tell me I was working too hard, but she understood what this meant for our family. This wasn't just about a promotion. This was about Emily graduating debt-free and having enough money to help Jake through college too. The breakthrough came in March when I figured out how to increase fuel efficiency by 18% without sacrificing power. The math was beautiful. Tiny modifications to the combustion chamber geometry that changed everything about how fuel burned inside the engine. I'd been chasing this particular innovation for 3 years, and suddenly all the pieces clicked together. Glenn Hoffman himself came down to the shop to see the test results. "Howard," he said, "this could change everything for Redwood Auto Parts. We're talking about becoming Ford's primary supplier for the next decade." Barry was there for that conversation. He seemed excited, asked if he could get copies of all my test data and CAD files to prepare the client presentation. "I want to make sure Ford understands exactly what we've accomplished here," he said. I handed over everything: design schematics, performance data, even my personal research notes from the past 3 years. I trusted the guy. We'd been working together for months, and he'd never given me any reason for doubt. 2 weeks later, Barry scheduled what he called a strategy review meeting with upper management. He didn't tell me much about it, just said he wanted to present our progress to the executive team before the final Ford presentation. I figured it was standard procedure. Maybe they wanted to make sure we were ready for such a big client meeting. I should have known something was wrong when I walked into that conference room. 8 senior executives sitting around the table, all looking serious. Barry had his laptop connected to the big screen, a thick presentation folder in front of him. This wasn't a casual progress update. This was a formal review. "Howard, glad you could join us," Glenn said, but his tone was different, more formal than usual. "Barry has some concerns about the Ford project that we need to discuss." I took my seat, confused. Concerns? We'd just had that celebration in the workshop 2 weeks ago when Glenn saw the test results. What concerns could there possibly be? Barry cleared his throat and launched into his presentation. "After extensive analysis of Howard's approach to the Ford contract, I've identified several significant technical and business risks that require immediate attention." He clicked to his first slide. Engine design assessment. Critical issues identified. My stomach dropped. "The combustion chamber modifications Howard has been pursuing," Barry explained to the room, "represent a significant departure from proven automotive engineering principles. When tested against conventional V6 designs, the performance gains are negligible, while the manufacturing costs increase by 23%. I sat there speechless while he clicked through slide after slide, systematically destroying 6 months of work. He had charts showing my efficiency gains as within margin of error, graphs comparing my design to industry standard approaches that made my innovations look like expensive mistakes, cost projections that showed my engine would be 30% more expensive to manufacture. Furthermore, Barry continued, the technical complexity introduces multiple failure points that could result in warranty claims and potential recalls. The risk to Redwood's reputation with a client like Ford cannot be overstated. Glenn Hoffman looked confused and concerned. "Barry, are you saying Howard's design won't work?" "I'm saying it's unnecessarily complex and risky for a client like Ford. They need reliability and proven performance, not experimental technology that might fail in real-world conditions." The room went quiet. All eyes turned to me. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. This felt like an ambush, and I needed to think clearly. "Barry, can you explain why Ford specifically requested this exact approach in their original engineering brief?" His confident expression wavered for just a second. "I'm not aware of any such specific request. Ford expects industry-standard solutions that meet their efficiency targets." I reached into my folder and pulled out Ford's technical specifications, 47 pages of engineering requirements that I'd studied like a Bible for months. "Page 23, I said, sliding it across the table to Glenn. "Ford's chief engineer explicitly requests non-traditional combustion chamber optimization to achieve their fuel efficiency targets." Glenn read the document, his expression getting more serious with each page. Other executives leaned in to look over his shoulder. "Glenn, I've got email exchanges with their technical team going back 4 months discussing exactly the approach Barry just called too risky. Dr. Sarah Miller from Ford's engineering division has been providing feedback on my prototypes since January." "Barry, is this accurate?" Glenn asked. Barry's voice had lost that MBA swagger. "There must be some misunderstanding about Ford's expectations. Their requirements need to be managed with realistic engineering constraints." "The constraints are spelled out right here," I said, pointing to the specifications. "Page 31 shows their own testing data. Traditional V6 designs max out at 12% efficiency improvements. They need 15% minimum to meet their 2027 emission standards. That's why they came to us instead of staying with their usual suppliers." I could see the executives exchanging glances. The numbers didn't lie, and Ford's requirements were clearly documented. Page 18 also mentions that they've already invested $2 million in testing facilities specifically designed to evaluate non-traditional engine designs, I continued. They're not looking for industry standard. They're looking for breakthrough innovation. The meeting ended awkwardly, with Glenn saying he'd need to review everything before the Ford presentation. But I could see the damage was done. Barry had planted seeds of doubt about my competence, my judgment, my ability to deliver what Ford actually wanted. Even with the documentation, some of those executives were probably wondering if I was some kind of rogue engineer pursuing pet theories instead of sound business practices. Walking back to my workshop, I felt sick to my stomach. 24 years at this company, and now my own colleague was questioning my technical judgment in front of senior management. The worst part was that Barry had access to all my work. He'd asked those detailed questions, taken all those notes, studied my designs for months. He knew exactly what Ford wanted, but he was willing to throw me under the bus anyway. Over the next few weeks, strange things started happening. Files disappeared from my computer, not everything, just specific CAD drawings and test results. Email chains with Ford engineers mysteriously got corrupted. The backup drive I kept in my desk drawer stopped working. My prototype engine, the one that had achieved the 18% efficiency improvement, developed problems that shouldn't have been possible. I came in one Monday morning to find contaminated fuel lines. Wednesday, the electronic sensors were miscalibrated. Friday, some small but critical components were simply missing. Each problem was fixable, but it meant rebuilding tests, recalibrating equipment, losing weeks of progress. I started staying late, making backup copies of everything, documenting every conversation. Susan thought I was becoming paranoid, but something was definitely wrong. In 24 years at Redwood, I'd never had this many technical problems in such a short time. "Honey, maybe you're just stressed about the promotion," Susan said one evening while I was organizing files at our kitchen table. "You've been working 14-hour days for months. Maybe some of these problems are just normal equipment issues." "Sue, fuel lines don't contaminate themselves, and I've never had 3 different backup systems fail in the same week." Then Keith Rodriguez from the union stopped by my workstation one afternoon. Keith had been at Redwood for 30 years, seen every kind of workplace drama you could imagine. He knew how to read the politics better than anyone. "Howard, you hear Barry's been having private meetings with Glenn? 3 times this week, always after you leave." That got my attention. "What kind of meetings?" "Don't know for sure, but my buddy in accounting says Barry's been requesting budget projections for something called alternative engineering approaches. Also heard him on the phone yesterday talking about intellectual property documentation." Keith lowered his voice. "Look, I don't want to cause trouble, but something doesn't smell right. That kid's been asking questions around the shop. Questions about your work habits, your prototype testing schedule, even when you usually take your lunch breaks. That evening I decided to come back to the plant around 9 p.m. Barry's car was still in the parking lot along with Glenn's. I used my badge to get into the engineering wing and heard voices from the conference room. Through the glass, I could see Barry presenting something to Glenn and 2 other executives I didn't recognize. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the slides on his laptop screen, my engine designs, my test data, my performance charts, all branded with something called Whitfield Engineering Solutions, apparently Barry's side consulting business that nobody at Redwood knew about. The presentation looked professional, charts, graphs, technical specifications, but it was my work, presented like Barry had developed it independently. I watched for 20 minutes, documenting everything with my phone camera before quietly leaving. The next morning, Glenn called me into his office. "Howard, we've decided to go with a more traditional approach for the Ford contract. Barry will be taking the lead on engineering specifications moving forward." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "Glenn, you've seen my test results. My design delivers exactly what Ford asked for. I know you've worked hard on this, but we can't afford to take risks on a contract this size." Barry's approach is more conservative. He's prepared a presentation showing how we can meet Ford's efficiency targets using modified conventional designs. Conservative. That's corporate speak for "we don't trust you anymore." "What about Ford's specific requirements? The non-traditional approach they explicitly requested?" Glenn looked uncomfortable. "Barry believes those requirements can be met through incremental improvements to existing technology. Lower risk, proven methodologies." For the next month, I watched Barry take credit for everything I'd built while simultaneously dumbing it down to meet his conservative approach. The fuel efficiency gains dropped from 18% to 8%. The manufacturing innovations that could have set Redwood apart were stripped out in favor of industry-standard components. When Ford's engineers came for the final presentation, I wasn't even invited to attend. I sat in my workshop listening to Barry's voice echoing from the conference room, explaining his engine design to the people who had originally requested my innovations. Dr. Sarah Miller from Ford called me personally 2 days later. "Howard, I have to ask, what happened to the combustion chamber modifications we'd been discussing? The presentation showed conventional fuel injection patterns. I didn't know what to say. How do you explain that your own company decided your work was too risky without sounding bitter?" "There were some internal changes to the project approach," I said carefully. "I see. Well, we're still interested in the original innovation. Would it be possible to schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss implementation challenges?" "Dr. Miller, I'm no longer leading the technical side of this project. You'll need to work directly with Barry Whitfield." "Understood. That's disappointing, Howard. Your approach was exactly what we were hoping to find." 3 weeks later came the announcement that hurt most. Barry Whitfield had been promoted to Chief Engineering Officer, my job, the position I'd been working toward for 24 years. The press release mentioned his breakthrough innovations in fuel-efficient engine design and his collaborative leadership in landing Redwood's largest contract ever. Susan found me sitting at our kitchen table that evening, staring at the company newsletter with Barry's smiling face on the front page. "I'm sorry, honey," she said, putting her hand on my shoulder. "I know how much that promotion meant to you. It's not just the promotion, Sue. It's everything. 24 years of building this company, training younger engineers, developing innovations that actually help people, and some kid with an MBA and good connections gets credit for all of it. What are you going to do?" I honestly didn't know. At 47, starting over somewhere else felt impossible. Most companies want young engineers they can train and promote. Who's going to hire a middle-aged guy with 24 years at one company, especially if my current employer doesn't give me a strong reference? Then, Linda Cooper from our legal department stopped by my desk with some paperwork. "Howard, we need you to sign off on these patent applications for the Ford engine project." I looked at the documents. Every single innovation I'd developed was listed as a Whitfield/Redwood collaborative invention. Barry's name appeared first on 6 different patents that represented 3 years of my personal research. "Linda, these are my designs. I can prove it with dated files, email records, even shop logs showing when I built and tested each component." She looked uncomfortable. "The paperwork shows joint development. Barry says you built the prototypes based on his engineering specifications and collaborative research." Collaborative research? I developed these innovations on my own time, some of them years before Barry even joined the company. "Howard, I'm just processing the legal paperwork. If you have concerns about intellectual property attribution, you'll need to take that up with management." That's when I realized how deep this went. Barry hadn't just stolen my work. He'd been systematically building a paper trail that made it look like his ideas from the beginning. The detailed questions, the note-taking, the requests for documentation. He'd been preparing for this moment for months. I spent that weekend in my garage workshop going through 3 years of personal research files, test results with my signature and handwriting, computer models with creation dates going back to 2021, even video footage I'd shot while testing early prototypes, long before Barry joined Redwood. 2 months later, I got a phone call from my old friend Pete Kowalski, who'd retired from Redwood 5 years earlier and now did consulting work around the automotive industry. "Howard, you're not going to believe this. I just saw the agenda for next month's SAE conference. Barry Whitfield is giving a keynote presentation called Revolutionary Approaches to V6 Fuel Efficiency. Sound familiar? The Society of Automotive Engineers Conference, biggest gathering of automotive engineers in North America. Ford sends their entire technical team. GM, Chrysler, Toyota, everyone attends. If Barry was presenting there, he was positioning himself as the industry expert on engine efficiency innovations. My innovations. I spent the next week gathering evidence like my life depended on it. Email chains with Ford engineers discussing my specific designs going back 18 months. CAD file metadata showing creation dates and modification history from my personal computer, shop logs documenting every prototype test, signed and dated, patent applications with my original sketches and calculations from 2021. Most importantly, I had the original Ford engineering brief that specifically requested the methodologies Barry was now claiming as his breakthrough thinking. Susan helped me organize everything into a simple presentation folder. You're really going to confront him publicly? She asked. Sue, if I don't do this, he gets away with it. 24 years at Redwood and some MBA punk steals my life's work to launch his career? What kind of message does that send to Emily and Jake about standing up for what's right? The SAE conference was held at the Chicago Convention Center. I'd presented there twice before, back when Redwood encouraged engineers to share our research with the industry. I knew the setup, knew the crowd, knew how these presentations worked. Barry's session was scheduled for Thursday afternoon in the main auditorium. Fuel efficiency innovations, breaking traditional V6 design limitations. The abstract promised to reveal groundbreaking approaches that major automakers were already implementing. I registered for the conference under my own name and spent Wednesday evening in my hotel room, preparing. Not a PowerPoint presentation. I'd learned that lesson from watching Barry manipulate data. Instead, I prepared a simple document folder with printed evidence, timestamps, email headers, technical drawings with my signature and dates, old-school documentation that couldn't be hacked or corrupted. Thursday afternoon, the auditorium was packed. Ford's entire engineering team sat in the front section, including Dr. Sarah Miller. Glenn Hoffman was there with several Redwood executives. Engineers from every major automaker, trade journalists, even some professors from engineering schools. This was Barry's moment to establish himself as the industry's next big innovator. Barry took the stage looking confident in his expensive suit. His presentation was polished, professional, full of impressive charts and technical diagrams. My charts and diagrams, just reformatted and rebranded. The breakthrough came from recognizing that traditional combustion chamber design assumptions were limiting efficiency gains, he explained to the audience of maybe 400 engineers. By reimagining the fundamental geometry of fuel injection patterns, we achieved unprecedented performance improvements. He clicked to a slide showing the exact combustion chamber modifications I'd spent 2 years perfecting. The dimensions, the angles, even the material specifications, everything identical to my original design. Through extensive testing and refinement, we demonstrated an 18% improvement in fuel efficiency without compromising engine power output. This represents a fundamental advancement in automotive engineering. From my seat in the back, I stood up. Excuse me, Barry. Could you explain when you developed this combustion chamber approach? The auditorium went quiet. Barry shielded his eyes against the stage lights, trying to see who was speaking. The development timeline spanned approximately 18 months of intensive research and testing, he replied, his voice carrying clearly through the wireless microphone. I started walking toward the front of the auditorium. That's interesting, because I have Ford's original engineering brief from 20 months ago, specifically requesting this exact approach. I also have email exchanges with their technical team discussing these modifications 6 months before you claim to have developed them. Murmurs spread through the audience. Glenn Hoffman's face had gone pale. The Ford engineers were looking at each other with confused expressions. I'm not sure what you're implying, Barry said, but his voice had lost its confidence. I reached the front of the auditorium and faced the crowd. I'm Howard Bradley, Senior Design Engineer at Redwood Auto Parts. For the past 3 years, I've been developing these fuel efficiency innovations, initially as personal research and later for Ford's V6 project. Every design element in this presentation represents my work, my testing, my calculations. I held up my folder. I have documentation proving the development timeline, including patent applications, CAD file creation dates, and correspondence with Ford engineers dating back to 2021. Mr. Whitfield was assigned to manage the business aspects of this project. He had access to my technical files, but no involvement in the actual engineering development. The room erupted in whispers. Barry tried to regain control. This is highly irregular. I don't know what Mr. Bradley's motivations are, but my motivation, I interrupted, is 24 years of honest engineering work and watching a colleague take credit for innovations that could define the next decade of automotive efficiency. Dr. Sarah Miller stood up from her seat in the front row. Excuse me, but we've been working directly with Mr. Bradley on these specifications for over a year. Our email records and meeting notes document his development process in detail. Mr. Whitfield handled project coordination, but the technical innovations came from Mr. Bradley. The auditorium fell completely silent. Glenn Hoffman looked like he wanted to disappear. Other Redwood executives were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Barry's face had gone red. There seems to be some confusion about project roles and development timelines. No confusion, I said, opening my folder. Just documentation. Every innovation in your presentation can be traced back to specific dates, specific tests, specific conversations with Ford's engineers. You managed the project schedule and client communications. I designed the engines. At that point, the conference moderator stepped in and suggested continuing the discussion offline. But the damage was done. Within 24 hours, video clips of the confrontation were circulating through automotive industry social media. Trade publications started calling for interviews. Ford issued a statement clarifying their technical partnership with the Redwood engineering team, led by Howard Bradley. Barry submitted his resignation the following Monday. Not fired, just pursuing new opportunities outside the automotive sector. But everyone in the industry knew what had happened. 2 weeks later, Glenn called me into his office. "Howard, the board has approved a new position. Chief Technology Officer focusing on innovation development and technical partnerships. Substantial salary increase, stock options, and a technical team reporting directly to you." At 47, after 24 years of working with my hands and my head, I finally got the recognition I'd earned. More importantly, my innovations are going into production. Ford's 2027 truck line will feature efficiency improvements that could save millions of gallons of fuel annually, and my name is on the patents where it belongs. The lesson isn't about revenge. It's about having the courage to stand up for your work and your integrity when someone tries to destroy what you've spent decades building. Sometimes the quiet guys know exactly when to stop being quiet, and when we finally speak up with facts and evidence, the loudest voices in the room suddenly have nothing left to say.